Berto, so after 16 years of doing this podcast and what feels like 16 years of doing this deep dive, we have finally arrived at the 16th chapter of the deep dive on the psychology of Elon Musk. Let's get into it. What do you say?
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I monitor ocelots in the morning.
So in the last chapter, we started talking about what I am calling in my notes the Twitter downward spiral. We've already been over bits and pieces of this story. We're kind of going back to a certain point, looking at the last 6 years through the Twitter lens, if you will. And we talked about his breakup with Amber Heard. We talked about COVID-19. We talked about the different drugs that he has talked about and taken and how that might affect his current behavior. And that brings us to the end of 2022, which I think is another pivotal point in his life, another turning point, if you will, or a point that pushed him even further down the road. Because up until this point, in terms of his motivation to try to be liked by the left and the right, he's definitely more right, but he's not like super right.
Right.
And I think what happens to him over the next year, I think pushed him super right. So it's the end of 2022, November, he buys Twitter. There's a lot of details about this whole story.
Yeah.
I looked into it, I took notes on it, and then I said, we'll be here forever. But, just let it be known there's a lot of details and some problems and some other issues that I'm not mentioning. But anyway.
I will say two notable things that stuck out for me, though, were one, the impulsiveness of the inception of the thing. So he literally just tweeted it. And there was a story that Grimes planted the idea in his head. At the very least, she sent them a message.
No, you're thinking of Tallulah Riley.
Or Tallulah Riley, sorry.
Yeah.
And anyways, and then that was the one thing, the impulsiveness of it. And then the second thing that stood out to me is how he desperately tried to get out of it and then couldn't.
Yeah. So that's November. He buys Twitter. Now we're talking about December. A lot of things happening in a quick succession here. Dave Chappelle was at the height of all of his controversies regarding gender and pronouns and trans and LGBTQ, right? And he invites Elon on stage during one of his stand-up shows.
Right.
What do you remember about this?
He got viciously booed. This is what I remember. I watched this and I thought, with all the context at the time, all I thought was, wow, this is going to hurt him deeply. Now that I know what I know, this had to be the equivalent of driving a rocket-powered Tesla into his heart.
Yeah, right. A good way of putting it. Poetic. So Chappelle has him on stage. This is from the YouTube channel TMZ, of course. So I don't know if you caught that, but Elon says, "You weren't expecting this, were you?" I think referring to the booing.
This is a Dave Chappelle show, meaning these people aren't booing because Elon might have said something about trans people or something, or that he's even a little anti-woke or whatever.
Which he wouldn't be at this point.
Right. They're booing for a lot of other reasons.
Yeah.
And that's very telling, because Chappelle, neither of them thought that this was going to be the reception.
Yeah. Now, Twitter is in the San Francisco area, right? And he had just fired a bunch of people. So I think people were booing him because of the Twitter stuff.
Yeah.
And Dave Chappelle says, maybe some of those people are some of the people that you fired recently. That could be true.
Yeah.
There could have been a lot of people, because he fired a lot of people.
Yeah.
Just
most of the company
within a week or two before this. But anyway, so this happens where he's booed. I don't think you or I are surprised that there's some people in the audience that go to a Dave Chappelle show are booing Elon Musk, right? But to him, I think it was a surprise. A lot of evidence is pointing in the direction that he would not have agreed to go on stage if he knew that even 10% of the crowd was going to boo him, right? So I think this was rough on him. And again, you could say, well, you asked for it, buddy. Sorry, you did this to yourself. What'd you expect? It raises this question of maybe Elon in the real world, he has so many yes men, and all the people that interview him and all the audiences, it's a lot of tech people, and they're probably just fawning over him, right?
Right.
he's never experienced a group of people that aren't in those industries or aren't needing something from him. And this might have been the first experience he had with a large crowd of people that aren't his fans. They're Dave Chappelle fans. And because there's thousands and thousands, it looks like Dave Chappelle is performing to like a key arena size, probably like 20, 30,000, maybe more people. Well, 2,000 or 3,000 people don't like him, and 500 of them are going to start booing. You're going to hear it.
And by the way, that if this had happened in 2017, Dave Chappelle's show invites Elon Musk on stage, there wouldn't have been a story about boos. Even if some people were booing, because probably people would have still been booing, right? But overwhelmingly, it would have been like, oh my gosh, it's Elon Musk. At this point, it's like, wait, what? I'm the villain now?
Right. So to us, it's not a surprise, particularly after he bought Twitter. I mean, even as he was gearing up to buy Twitter, there was a lot of negative press. He buys Twitter, the sync thing. He starts firing people. He starts to scale back on a lot of the moderation, letting a lot of like horrible people back on Twitter, which we'll get into in a second. It's not surprising to us, but it's interesting that it would be surprising to him. Now, if he was not surprised by this, I think he would have reacted differently as things progress here. And this wouldn't be long after Elon Musk was on SNL. He was on SNL in 2021, I believe. Right. So anyway, let's take a break. When we get back, let's continue going through the events of this 1 month, just the highlights of December of 2022. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. So there's another event that happens after this show, which I'll summarize and say that in all likelihood, and there's some evidence that this really destroyed him. It was a huge blow. It's one thing to get a bunch of haters on Twitter. It's another thing to have it in person. I think it really hit home for him. It really was a further nail in the coffin for him, or a stake through the heart, or whatever.
Well, no one experiences this, just to be clear. The percentage of humans in the world that experience a crowd cheering or booing for them is almost 0%. So no human experiences thousands of people live booing at them, right? Yeah. So this would hurt anyone, let alone someone who's got massive trauma in this area.
Right. So what happens is a man was suffering from a psychotic delusion, seemingly, that Elon had been stalking him, and he started following Elon's car around Los Angeles, and he put on a black hood and a mask, and he jumped on Elon's car while Elon was driving, and at least one of Elon's kids was in the car with him, like his 2-year-old son, I think the Ash one. And, you can imagine that being pretty frightening and upsetting. It's one thing to have it happen to you. Another thing if your 2-year-old son. From all reports, it sounded like it was just Elon and his 2-year-old son in the car. I don't know. Maybe a driver. I don't know. But it's frightening. Okay?
Oh, no, it's ridiculous. It's horrifying.
Yeah. And I think we tend to assume that the Elons of the world are walking around with like Secret Service and bulletproof cars and stuff. I don't think most people, including Elon, have that level of security at all times. So you'd imagine this would be very frightening, right? In the midst of the booing, people don't like me, someone's jumping on my car. Then we get to this Twitter account. So remember, he's now in charge, and he's throwing his weight around Twitter, and he's starting to ban accounts, and he's starting to reinstate accounts. And we'll get to the specifics later, the big ones. But it's notable that right after this attack, there is this Twitter account that becomes viral called @ElonJet. And it's a long, complicated story. It's, there's a lot of details here. But essentially, this user on Twitter was live tweeting about the real-time location of Elon Musk's private jet.
Right.
Apparently, this information is publicly available. I'm not quite sure, maybe because of the FAA or something. I don't know.
Yes.
But he was just tweeting this publicly available information, and a lot of people were following it. So I heard about this story, and I heard about him banning this guy's Twitter account. And the consensus that I was hearing was that Elon Musk is a jerkface. He's banning accounts that are doing things to other people, and he's allowing that, but he doesn't want it to be done to him. So this is evidence that Elon Musk is just going to turn Twitter into his own personal, beef factory, if you will.
Yes. And
and considering that he was just attacked by someone, you could imagine him being in a state of mind. Now, if he had a different leadership style or org chart, he would have a board of directors or advisors or something, and he couldn't just personally, ban someone. He would have to go through that, and they would say, well, if we do that, then we have to ban everyone else. So da-da-da.
And the thing for me is like, look, you're just proving our point, at least my point. My point is, like, it's a private company. You own it now. You can do whatever the hell you want. You can ban every user tomorrow if you want. You're entitled. Are we going to be annoyed about it and maybe not patron your services? Sure, but you can do it. It's your private company. You were the ones saying that private companies shouldn't be able to do that, and that you're a free speech absolutist, and you probably would have even said that you were willing to die for it. So that's why people are like, what?
Right. About an account that is just publishing publicly available information. Right?
Now, to be clear, I would ban him too. On my personal platform, and I think he should have banned him because that seems pretty insecure or whatever. But it's just so inconsistent and double faced, and that's why people are like.
Now, to be clear, the user was not saying and attack him.
No, of course not.
They're just saying this is where and not even where his car is or where he is, but this is where his private jet is. Now, given Elon's possible additional trauma of being attacked and all the trauma he's been through his life, but specifically that, at least the public statements from Elon is that he was banning this account or suspending it because he was worried about his children's safety.
It's like, I didn't think the leopards would attack my face. That's the meme. And it's like, yes, leopards attack faces.
Yeah. So there were several journalists that wrote about the story, including New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, and Elon banned them as well. The accounts were restored after a few days, but this was an immediate indication that Elon Musk's statements, as you say, were not true, that he is saying one thing and doing another. Okay, so this brings me to something that I learned just today.
Whoa.
And it is potentially the most important thing that I have found.
Oh, man.
Which is the following, that Elon Musk has visible signs of suffering emotionally. Because this whole time I've been figuring that he must be suffering emotionally, and there's all these indirect signs, and he's even talked about it, that he's lonely and he's taking ketamine and all these different, but I would assume that he is suffering emotionally to such a degree that people would start noticing when he is at a particular level of emotional suffering.
Okay.
But I hadn't heard anything. But then I found something today, which is that around this time, so December 2022, he buys Twitter. There's a lot of bad press around that.
Right.
There's the booing on the stage at Dave Chappelle. There's the attack on his car. There's the Elon jet thing. There's the backlash from that he is downward spiraling on a number of levels, okay? He's talked about how he suffers from, acute depression and needs ketamine to get by. I don't know if he has ketamine yet at this point, but he's suffering greatly. And because people were attacking him online, people are attacking him in the media, he's in such a negative emotional state, he's suffering so greatly that he locks himself in his office at Twitter.
Oh.
And other Twitter employees would notice this and would eventually report this.
I never heard this.
Yeah. It's just a side of the reporting that is just not in our echo chamber.
Yeah.
And eventually they come to believe, and I don't know how they got here, but they come to believe that he's going to kill himself.
What?
Yeah.
How did this not?
Because our echo chamber.
Well, but you say our echo chamber, but his echo chamber also would not want this story, right?
Right.
It seems like no echo chamber wants this story.
Mine would, because I'm a shrink, and there's not a lot of us. But he apparently had who knows, maybe they just made it up, but they were on the verge of calling 911 to do something about it.
Okay.
And they report this to journalists, right? Now, this is just the one report that we've heard.
Okay.
I have a hard time believing this is the first time this has ever happened to him, right? You imagine there's a huge incentive for people who witness this to not talk about it, which I would applaud. He deserves his privacy. If he should be able to tell people about this if he wants to. But we're hearing about this one event, and this is at another pinnacle of the downward spiraling of his emotions. Now, it's self-inflicted, almost all of it, right? I mean, not his childhood trauma, but the current circumstances.
Right.
The whole Thailand cave, because I go back to 2018 and that event, or I guess even further back, 2017, when he gets dumped by Amber Heard, and he talks about being lonely and very, very hurt by that. 2018, what?
I just realized another thing that happened in November or December of 2022. That was ChatGPT. That's when it came out.
What do you mean?
Isn't that when it came out, ChatGPT?
You would know more than I would.
Yeah. Well, that's another blow to him.
How so?
Because, he was the early instigator of OpenAI. Then he exits and he's like, these guys won't do it. And all of a sudden they're getting all the attention on the AI front. OpenAI has solved, obviously it was premature, but OpenAI solved AI. They basically passed the Turing test. This thing's going to revolutionize the world. And he's no longer part of it. That's another blow. And it's not a trivial blow. AI is a linchpin in his strategy.
Yeah.
Right? So,
well, and he'd been struggling with AI at Tesla.
Right.
Not being able to find, it seemed so like easy or plausible or attainable, but for years, I mean, they got the AI with the Tesla for the self-driving cars to be very, very good.
Right.
But they weren't able to get that last final bit of percentage.
They still don't have it.
Right. And they still, so it's that last little bit. And so you just imagine the frustration
and
there.
all happening at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good to add that to the list. And this points to just how much suffering he's going through. This is, if we believe this report, which I do, this is just one tiny little glimpse into what he is likely feeling frequently since he was a child. These moments of just extreme suffering and pain. The way that he comes across and the way that people describe him is that he's unemotional. And Tallulah Riley will say, he is not only emotional, he's more emotional than anyone I've ever met. He has huge emotions. Happiness, sadness, anger, all of it times 10. He's very emotional. And the amount of trauma he's been through and the amount of self-sabotage. And remember, in the last chapter, we talked about the psychodynamic reasons as to why he would recreate the playground of his youth of him being victimized and bullying, and how it might have been helpful at first on Twitter, but became its own monster to him, So then he buys Twitter, and let's watch a clip from this video from Frontline PBS.
There's a gap between like Elon Musk tweeting, I'm going to buy this company, or like sending an angry text message saying, I want to buy your company, and like the bankers at Morgan Stanley putting together the commitment letter saying, here's your $44 billion of financing.
So by all reports, people close to Elon Musk, and I think from statements himself, this is not one of those purchases like his founding of SpaceX or getting involved with Tesla at the beginning, where it's thought out, it's a part of his mission, he has a plan before going into it, but it all fits. This is the purchase that, by all reports, it was absolutely impulsive, and he wasn't serious, but because of his statements on Twitter, he locked himself in on a deal that he couldn't back out of without losing his shirt, without losing Tesla or everything, or all his stock or whatever. And it's another indication that the Twitter world for him is not the same as his regular business world. The Twitter world is a place for him to reenact his traumas, not for him to make sound business choices.
And thinking of the description of his businesses as babies, this is a new impulsive baby that threatens to kill all his other babies unless he pays alimony now. I know, I've dragged it through the mud.
No, I like it.
But it's crazy because you're right. Everything before that, in fact, I was saying in an earlier episode where it didn't actually make sense to the outside observer as typical good investments, right? It's like, what? You're buying an electric car company? What? You're buying solar? But to him, he had a vision. He had a structure to his futurism that was like, well, yeah, because I need this, I need all these Lego pieces because I'm building this huge thing. Fine. Now, he could claim, oh, yeah, no, I've always wanted X, the super app that does it all. Sure. This is an impulsive move. Yeah. And not only that, but obviously so because he tried to back out. And if it had been well thought out, why would he have tried to back out?
Yeah. And he has publicly stated that he overpaid.
Yeah, of course.
And that doesn't sound like someone that was making a careful, thought out business choice. Let's watch more.
Did it appear like an impulse buy?
I would have said more like a rage buy. It didn't on the surface seem to have a ton of like business or financial logic to it. One reason it seems impulsive is because he changed his mind like a week later, he tried to get out of the deal.
Elon Musk now backing out of his $44 billion agreement to purchase Twitter.
At the very least, you could say that he's smart enough not to be so stupid on Twitter. He had already been successfully prosecuted or sued by the SEC regarding statements. He understands, he's been told, he knows that you can't make certain statements on Twitter or anywhere without there potentially being a major consequence, maybe even jail time, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that he would do this indicates that there's an emotional need that is overriding his common sense. I mean, if of anyone that knows that you're not supposed to say random shit on Twitter, it's him. I mean, how many people have been prosecuted by the United States Federal Security and Exchange Commission for a tweet that they said, right? Especially when it comes to stating specific purchase prices.
Right.
Like, so he was reacting. And I think what was happening for him over time, because, you know, he had been complaining about moderation for a while. I think it involves a few things. One is he is desperate to get acceptance in his one social milieu, which happens to be Twitter. And anything that would go wrong with that, dopamine drip and that acceptance, he could interpret as being related to Twitter's administration or their moderation as negatively impacting him. As he starts to go down the road to the right, which we've already been talking about, he could start to see, well, of course, Twitter, they're all leftists, they're all liberals. There's no way that they're not doing things to me that is causing negative things, which is getting in the way of me getting acceptance and love and security and safety. So he wants it for that reason. I think another reason is that, any kid, if you could walk up to like your little one,
right?
She goes to recess, right?
Right.
So if you went up to her and said, "Look, would you like Daddy to buy the school and the playground and tell the teachers they can't give you homework and that the bullies have to leave the school?"
Right.
Do you think your kid would say, "No, Daddy,
That's not fair.
That's not fair." Your kid would be. What would your kid say?
Yes. Can you really do that? I mean, actually, my youngest kid is such a contrarian that she actually probably would find some reason why no. But in general, absolutely.
If she had the money to do so. Yeah. So for him, he regresses. This is his playground. This is his childhood playground
totally.
In a very real way. And he does have the money technically to buy the playground, and emotionally he needs that. Also, another factor is that a lot of the success treadmill that he had been on to distract him and validate him, although was progressing, there wasn't as many flashy things over the last few years,
Right. I will take one note, though. Knowing full well what it feels like to spend addictively and impulsively, he actually didn't have the money for this purchase. That made it even worse. He, on paper, had this and that. He didn't. And that's part of the reason he tried to back out, is because he actually didn't. It took a lot, and Saudi financing and reportedly Russia financing, and a lot of folks that you don't want necessarily having your controls, your little puppet strings, to even close the deal in the first place. And now many of the ones that even put money in, like Fidelity and others, are deeply regretting having been involved with it. It wasn't a slam dunk for him at all.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
So even more, and really maybe the most poignant reason or indication of someone that is not in their right mind. Now people say, "Oh, he's drug-addled." We've already been over that. I don't think that's true. I think that the suffering was increasing. It was just ever since 2018, it was just getting worse and worse and worse. The loneliness, the desperation, the suffering, the depressive episodes. And he went through a bad streak of tweets and in his personal life, and he's just like, "God damn it, if I could just find a solution." And he just rattled off this tweet of, "If I just want to buy you, I just want to get you to stop getting in my way of acceptance and love and having a sense of worth and safety in my life."
And I will say, look, whenever I made impulsive clothing and other impulsive purchases, I was actually never ever drunk. It was never a thing where I was drunk and then I did it. But could I imagine that I could have sometime been drunk and also made those decisions? Yes. So I guess my point would be that, in fact, maybe if I were drunk, I would have made even worse decisions, probably. But I wouldn't say, it was because I got drunk that day. No, I probably got drunk that day because I was suffering, and I was impulsively buying in general because I was suffering, and maybe that day being drunk made it even worse. So is it possible that on this one day he also had substance? Maybe, but either way, like you said, he was hurt.
Yeah.
Deep.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's take a break, and we get back. Let's go into detail as to what he did to Twitter. This doesn't have as much to do with his traumas, just more of the newsworthiness of it all, like who he reinstated and maybe an indication of where his mind is going in terms of further right, which we've already been over as to why that would happen. It's just so interesting, and I spent so much time looking into it that I found it necessary for my own sanity to just kind of, because I heard a lot of things and a lot of contradictory things and a lot of conflictual things, and so it felt good to kind of just go through some of the highlights. But the rest of this episode will be just for patrons of the podcast, so become a patron to listen to this. This might be our very last chapter. It would be poetic if it was, because of 16. But we'll see. Hopefully, we'll see. And otherwise, please take care of yourself, because
you deserve it.